Hi there guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cover Zero show with me, your host, Simon Conboy. Today's episode is another entry into the quarterback Quandaries series, where I select one of the NFL teams that has either a question mark at the quarterback position right now, or in the case of this episode, it appears that they're going to have an issue potentially as early as next off-season. And look at the current options on the depth chart, try to peer into next year's draft to offer up potential solutions. Also trying to look ahead to free agency, although next year, frankly, it doesn't look like there's going to be too many options for teams unless Kirk Cousins comes free, although I'm firmly in the camp it's either Washington or San Fran for him. So today's episode, we're focusing on the NFC South's New Orleans Saints. So the other three teams in that division, they look set at quarterback for the foreseeable future. Now, the Saints have had, future Hall of Famer and absolute stat monster, the incredibly reliable Drew Brees at quarterback since, 2005 now? Still playing at an incredibly high level, but he is approaching the age where he could fall off as early as next season. He's 38 now, I believe. So, if you think what happened to Peyton Manning, whilst, Brees has been very fortunate in his time in New Orleans to avoid injuries, do remember one of the reasons he was let go from San Diego was because of a major shoulder injury. It's also the reason that Miami didn't sign him back when he was a free agent. So, there is the potential that, like Manning, after many surgeries and approaching that age, and this guy's thrown the ball about as much as anyone over the course of his career, anyone in NFL history, that it's certainly not beyond the realms of possibility that, much like Peyton Manning in his last year, in the next couple of seasons, that we see something along those lines from Drew Brees. Now, I've got no doubt, as long as Brees is performing at the kind of level we're used to, there is no reason to even contemplate replacing him directly. But you look at the depth chart at the moment, when that moment comes, this team looks like they're in trouble. Chase Daniels bounced around the league as a backup, seen very limited action, has a very low ceiling. It would certainly appear. You've got Garrett Grayson, who's we've not seen anything from in the NFL, and Ryan Nassib, who, when we did see him with New York, he looked very, very poor. So it doesn't appear like there's an answer there. I think one of the difficulties for New Orleans in finding a backup is, whilst Drew Brees is there, this team is somewhat competitive. So they do need to take a shot at the quarterback spot. The team has neglected to do so. They've not had an enormously high pick. The quarterback options that they've had to choose from potentially over the last few years have been very limited. As a result, they've not pulled the trigger. There's also, I think, the approach the franchise takes that as long as Drew Brees is there, there is a possibility that they can contend for a Super Bowl. So, of course, picking a quarterback in the first or second round who's just going to sit on the bench for a year, 2, maybe 3 years, just isn't conducive to those attempts. Unfortunately, this team's defense has just improved maybe slightly in the last 3 years, but not significantly enough that I feel like this team is capable of putting together a deep playoff run. It just feels like at some point the wheels will fall off. We've seen in the regular season, as great as Drew Brees has been, this team is not geared to win 4 or 5 games in a row, like 4 games in the playoffs, 3 games in the playoffs. It's just not going to happen. Relying on the offense, especially when you start playing the top tier defenses that inevitably make the playoffs. It just seems to be the way it is. That, relying on your team to go score 30 plus points every week against high end teams, it's too much to ask. This team's gone 7-9, hasn't made the playoffs in a few years. It's been in the last 5 years, frankly, pretty damning. And to some degree, the amount of patience that Sean Payton has been shown is pretty incredible in today's NFL. I'm not saying that he necessarily should be fired. I think replacing a successful head coach, is something teams are often far too willing to do. But the progress has been non-existent with this franchise, and I would fear without Drew Brees, this team would be pretty shocking in all likelihood. I mean, as I've mentioned today and many times before, this defence hasn't just been poor. It feels like people are piling on them. I've seen Saints fans complaining about it. We're better than people, but they're really not. We're talking about a defence that's been historically inept over the last 3 seasons. The secondary's been very weak. They've looked to address it. They brought in, Jairus Byrd, spent some high draft picks on safeties. None of that's really panned out to this point. The corner position, they've not really invested in enough. Their pass rushers, they've got Cam Jordan, he's great. They've not had any good pass rushers for a while there. It's been really disappointing. I think if you're a Saints fan, to see one of the most dangerous quarterbacks in league history just kind of fighting to finish 500 each season, and that's part of the issue. As I say, Drew Brees is that good that this team is almost guaranteed to win at least 5 or 6 games, just because he's going to score that many points in some games. It's just how it is. If you can't play pass defence, the Saints are going to score on you, and it looks like we're set for more of the same. The offense looks loaded and the defense still looks pretty soft to me. So, and whilst Drew Brees is carrying on in this vein, it's very difficult. There was a lot of rumours that this year they were interested in Pat Mahomes. Of course, didn't have the option in the end, but maybe the Saints have needed to make an aggressive move. And we've seen the last 5 or 6 years in particular, if you see a quarterback you like, you do kind of just have to pull the trigger, because if you don't, there's a good chance someone else will. This year it was the Chiefs that did so. We even saw the Texans getting Deshaun Watson. We've seen countless absurd trades over the last few years. Of course, RG3, Carson Wentz last year, as well as Jared Goff. Whereas the Saints have just stayed put. So, and whilst they've been drafting guys towards the end of the draft just to sort of be backups, there doesn't appear to be any kind of contingency plan in place. Of course, they had McCown at one point, the other McCown, Luke McCown, behind Drew Brees as like a veteran quarterback. At this point, they've just got a couple of younger guys in Grayson and Nassib. And Nassib, I'm convinced, from what we've seen, is just definitely not an NFL starter. I don't think Chase Daniel is. And, Garrett Grayson's an unknown, but I wouldn't expect too much from him. For example, next year, the draft, better than the last season and this season in terms of the quarterbacks that should be available. But barring a Drew Brees injury or a total collapse of his ability to throw the ball, it's hard to see where the Saints may grab a guy if we can assume they finish with a similar record, because frankly, I think even that might be difficult with a couple of the injuries. I think Teron Armstead's a big deal. Max Unger might not be entirely ready for the season. If those guys can't hold up front, I think the defence doesn't look like it's improved significantly. It could be a long season. In some ways, it might be a good thing. I do feel like this offence does need a bit of a rebuild. They've got to start preparing for the future, because honestly, without Brees, this roster looks incredibly weak, especially in what's a pretty competitive division. The Buccaneers look like they're on the up. The Panthers have still got a really solid core of players. They've got some good players in most position groups. Their interior's solid. The receiving core has some pieces. Running back and quarterback look great at this point in time. Defensively, they've got a lot of high-end talent there, even if there are some holes. The Buccaneers look like an improving team with an ascending young quarterback. The Falcons are pretty stacked at this point in time. It looks like it's going to be difficult for them. And next year, there's some teams that look like they're set to tank. Of course, the Jets being primary among them. I think the Browns are likely to struggle again. These teams are going to likely snap up Also the Niners. These are 3 teams that could easily look to snap up the top 3 quarterbacks available in next year's draft. Maybe Josh Rosen is an option for them. I just can't see anyone else being available when the Saints are likely to be on the clock. I'm thoroughly expecting Darnold to end up being the number 1 pick. You've got Josh Allen. I think he'll be a high pick. His physical skill set's very good. He was very turnover prone last year. If he can improve that, I've got no doubt he'll be a top 5 pick. And the Saints just don't look like they're capable of being that bad, whilst this offense does look incredibly gifted at skill positions, and with Brees orchestrating that attack. So you're looking at the middle round, and teams aren't high on Josh Rosen. Maybe they go there. Maybe there'll be some players, of course, that rise up this season. Some second, third round guys. I think the Saints have no choice. They really need to look to address this position. Otherwise, maybe they're in a position where Sean Payton's just waiting on Drew Brees to retire, and then he'll be on his way from New Orleans. It has been a long tenure at this point, and at some point it feels like when they tank, it feels like Payton's on borrowed time to me, especially if Drew Brees goes down, then you're looking at a long rebuild, and I don't think Payton would be interested in that at this stage in his career, and I think it could be quite a long process for them. So I think this is a team that absolutely next year has to go after a quarterback in the first 3 rounds with the intention of developing them. Even maybe try and do something in free agency. I'm sure there'll be some guys get involved with Kirk Cousins. If you've got Sean Payton sticking around, you never know. It must be tempting to play under the guy. I think Kirk Cousins could play a fairly similar role to what Drew Brees does. We've also got the potential, who knows what will happen with Garoppolo. Maybe the Saints could put together a blockbuster there, although it really is feeling like if he was going to be moved from New England, it would have happened this off-season. It's interesting times, and of all the quarterback quandaries I've done, this is the one that I find the most difficult for the franchise, because I do feel that they're so far from competing. Like with the Giants, it's a similar situation. They've both got veteran quarterbacks that we know are capable of leading their team to a Super Bowl. But with the Giants, you can see a roster that looks like it can compete in the playoffs, whereas the Saints still feel like they're a ways away. And if anything, with Brees' age, he may be closer to the door than Eli Manning at this point. It's certainly a tough one, but the Saints do need to figure this out. Otherwise, we could easily end up with a return to the pre-Drew Brees era of the Saints, where they were, just an incompetent team for a large period of time, especially competing in such a difficult division, as I've mentioned, with a defence like that and what looked like some offensive powerhouses. They're going to need someone that can keep up once Drew Brees does hang up his cleats. I'm not sure what the answer is at this point, but there you have it. Those are some of the options at this point in time for the Saints. Let me know what you guys think. What do you think they should do? Do you think Brees is capable of possibly playing into his early 40s? As I say, my main concern is I just feel like at some point that shoulder injury is going... I feel like I can already... Not just I feel like you can already see the diminished arm strength. Hard to see him playing into that kind of 41, 42 year old range. So give us a shout. Facebook comments below. Got the Cover Zero Facebook. Find me on Twitter at Simon Conboy. Always happy to discuss football with people. Let us know which other teams you might like to see me discuss on this show. I think I've pretty much covered the majority of them at this point. But there's plenty of other stuff coming up. Of course, my power rankings have gone up this week for the offense and defense. Definitely check those out. They're a bit different to your standard power rankings. I think it's an interesting system I got there. My top 100s continuing. And tomorrow I'll have my top 10 tight ends currently in the NFL, as well as my weekly review. Actually, some somewhat valid news occurring now at this time of year, so it's definitely worth checking that episode out. And as always, if you've enjoyed it, like, share, subscribe, check out the Patreon. It'll all be thoroughly appreciated by myself, of course. Really am appreciative of you guys watching. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. Have a great evening and go Bucks.